What's up, folks? Welcome back for another week. Thank you very much all for joining again. I sat here as I always do, watching the chat rolling through for the last 10-15 minutes or so. So thank you very much. I know it's been going for a lot longer than that. Thank you for all of your input. I really appreciate it, and loads of questions this week. So thanks for all of those as well. There's probably way more than I can even possibly get through, but we're going to do our best. And of course, we'll leap into whatever you guys want to chat about on the way. So keep your comments and your questions coming. I would appreciate it, and I will try and dip in and out of those as much as I can as we go along. Sorry if the slight time change caught some of you out around the world, because here in the UK, the clocks did go back for an hour on Sunday night. It meant we all got an extra hour in bed, which is awesome. And also, by the way, I was off grid this whole weekend. So apologies if you sent me messages or Instagram messages, things on Twitter, whatever. I just disappeared off the grid for the whole weekend, and it was awesome. I had a weekend away with Claire. We went down to Somerset. I did get to see the Grand Prix, obviously, but I just stayed off social media, and actually it was really quite nice. Don't get me wrong, I love Twitter, I love Instagram. I'm fully back on it. I'm not giving it up, but it was nice to take a little break. So apologies if you sent me a message and you didn't get a response, because I'm normally very good at doing that, trying to keep up and respond to everybody. Didn't do it this weekend, but it was a one-off. Now I'm back to normal, so keep them coming and I will come back to you as soon as I can. Right, thank you very much all for joining from all over the world. Again, I can see already we've got California, Yorkshire, Canada, Scottsdale, Arizona. Again, I know that you're a regular. That is Michael Robinson. Thank you very much. Brooklyn, NYC in the house. Thank you. Maxime Giordani. Yes, I got a haircut, Carola. Absolutely. Been a couple of weeks now. Hello from Lincoln. Yeah, thank you very much to all of you. I really appreciate it. So wherever you are, Transylvania, Christian Kokis, thank you guys all over the world. This is mega. I love it. Love it. So let's get into it. And we are going to start where else but by talking about, the incredible achievement of Lewis Hamilton this weekend. I know we touched on it last time around when he equalled Michael Schumacher's record, but it would be remiss of us not to touch on the fact that he is statistically now the most winningest driver in Formula One history. That's no accident. That's not simply because someone's given him the best equipment. That is because he is the best of his generation. There can't be any question about it now. It's not because I'm in any way biased towards Lewis Hamilton. I massively respect what he has done and what he continues to do. His achievements and his work ethic and his ability, but most of all his attitude towards being better every time he gets in that car, driving the people around him to be better. And he's not finished yet, is he? 92 wins and almost certainly more to come. Who knows where that number will peak at? But I think he's going to top the 100, isn't he? And we'll see. On that subject, we haven't yet got a contract signed by Lewis, and we should talk about that, because there's definitely something going on in that sense. Because to say that, we're not ready to sit down and talk about it, it's not my main priority, and it may not be Lewis's main priority, but it's got to be pretty high up the priority list for Mercedes, because they need to know who they're going to have in their car next year. I'm almost certain it's going to be Lewis. I don't buy this whole conspiracy theory that him and Toto are suddenly going to drop a bombshell, they're going to leave and go to Aston Martin, or any of the other wild rumours that are flying around. I fully expect Lewis to be back in a Mercedes next year, with Toto still at the organisation, maybe in a slightly different role, with his duties being spread out amongst a group of people rather than just the one-man team principal role that he currently has. So I expect them all, the dream team, still to be there, just in maybe slightly different job titles, slightly different roles. There's no way Lewis is going to give up on the opportunity of, let's assume he takes his 7th world title this year. He could be an 8-time world champion. And whilst he may say to you, that doesn't matter, the records don't matter. Yes, they do. Absolutely they do. He would love to be statistically the most, the greatest Formula One driver of all time. I mean, there's lots of people who say that's the case already, but if it's in the record books, it will be there for, the foreseeable future, if not forever. He will not want to give up that opportunity. And the only place that he can really guarantee that opportunity is in a Mercedes. Mercedes know that as well, so they will want to keep him, and he will want to stay there. So I just see it as a matter of time before that deal is done. But it's not done yet, and that, you would think should be an absolute formality. Maybe chuck an extra few quid onto the end of the number, but it's clearly not about that. There must be other things around, whether it's his responsibilities for the team, whether he wants the team to commit to their own certain responsibilities around sustainability or environmentalism, or whether it's something about whether he gets, commercial rights to have himself, or whether he gets to keep some of his winning cars, or whatever it might be. There must be some sticking points bubbling away in the background, but I fully expect it to be sorted at some point soon, and I imagine we'll get that announcement before too much longer. Anyway, what an achievement, what an amazing moment that was over the course of this weekend. It shouldn't be underestimated because that is a massive deal. I know it's not the same as it was years ago, still a huge, huge achievement. Jonathan Oakley says, Max thinks he's going to break Lewis's records. Well, I don't doubt Max's ability in himself to break those records, but he needs a very, very long spell of domination in a winning car to be able to do that. That's what Lewis has had. He's created a lot of that opportunity himself, but he's had the tools underneath him from day one in his career. Max is already some way into his Formula One career now, still without a World Championship. So he needs to get either into the right car or have Red Bull deliver him the right car and go through a very long sustained period to be able to match or come close to Lewis's records. But if anyone can do it, Max probably could. Might Lewis only want a 1-year contract? I can't see, that's BB King 1977. I can't see Lewis not being tempted by the 22 cars. Yes, he will want, obviously, next year to go for that 8th world title. Every driver on that grid is fascinated to see what's going to happen in 2022. They are brand new cars, a whole new Formula One, essentially. No one's going to want to pass that up voluntarily, not even Lewis. And, he will see that as another challenge to, if he can take Mercedes to a win under the whole new regime, that's another box ticked for Lewis and his Mercedes team. So I can't see him passing that one up. Robert Chew says no one will beat Lewis for a very long time. I suspect that's probably true. And one of the reasons it's going to be so hard for anyone to come close to beating Lewis's records that he's setting at the moment is that there's a shift in kind of the way that the FIA and the way Formula One think about closing up the field. There's much more push to level the playing field. We're already seeing it in things like the cost cap, with the wind tunnel or aero research restrictions that are coming in from next year, where the teams at the front will get less wind tunnel and CFD time than those on a sliding scale towards the back, all designed to close the field up. So the likelihood of one team or one driver dominating to such a great extent is going to be diminished as we move forward under this new regime. So these records that Lewis is nailing right now could well stand for a long, long time. Let me see. Tim HB says, sure think Ham will go out on a high in 21. I mean, look, I wouldn't write anything off yet because, as I said, I would have thought we'd have had a contract announcement a long time ago, but I just can't see any driver not wanting to get into those 2022 cars because that's exciting for a Formula One driver. The best driver has the best car, Simon Robertson, absolutely. He does have the best driver in the right car, but he's earned that place. He's earned the right to be in the best car. The best teams with the best cars clamber over each other to get the best drivers into them. And that's what you earn on your way up through your career. That's what Lewis has done. Okay, shall we talk about the race? Because first of all, what a track! Love that Portimao circuit, the Algarve circuit. As I said to you last week, I've been lucky enough to drive it myself, and it is just spectacular. Even the drive to the circuit is amazing. The scenery around that place is just spectacular, and when you get onto the circuit, it's just amazing. There's no other circuit I can really equate it to in terms of its ups and downs and its cambered corners, and it's just brilliant. And I thought it suited Formula One really, really well. I do think that the DRS zone, and I'm sure we'll have lots of comments on this, the DRS zone this weekend was, first of all, it was too long. It may have even been unnecessary. That straight is a very long straight. It's also got some, a couple of series of very fast corners leading onto it, which are all flat out. So in effect, that long straight before the braking zone of what is actually really turn, it was a lift into turn 1, and then it's really a braking zone into turn 3. That whole section is incredibly long. So actually, I reckon you could have probably got away without any DRS, possibly. At the very least, we could have shortened the DRS zone dramatically to still have the same effect. I mean, look, you can't criticise too much. It's the first time we've been there with these cars. But I think if we go back, let's hope we can make some adjustments to that. So it was an awesome track. I thought the DRS zone was a little bit too much and kind of made it way too easy, to the point where, whilst there are some other overtaking spots around that circuit, if you really have to use them, there was almost no point in fighting it out through some of the other sections of the lap, because you know if you can get onto that start-finish straight within a certain range, it's a done deal. You'll whiz past with DRS. So that was a shame. But other than that, I thought the circuit was just spectacular. Why can't F1 keep mixing up the circuit, says Tim HB. Well, lots of you have said this as well. Could we start alternating between circuits, or every year could we start bringing in new circuits? And there's a couple of reasons you can't do that. And one is, obviously this year's a bit of a weird year, which is why it's all happened. But the promoters of these races, the circuit owners, need some stability. The costs of hosting a Formula One Grand Prix, not just in terms of the hosting fee, which is astronomical in itself, but the costs and the infrastructure and the process that goes into staging an event like this is massive, and the investment that goes behind it is massive. If you only are having to put that investment in with a 1 year or a sporadic contract where you never know when the next Grand Prix or the next big money payday is coming your way as a circuit owner, it just won't work for you. So they have to lock into 3 or 5 or 7 year contracts or whatever it is to be able to justify the investment the circuit needs to make to bring it up to standard and to put the infrastructure in place to make it happen. So that's the main reason it can't happen. The other thing is that what's great about turning up at these circuits kind of cold with very little in the way of data, well, that will only ever happen once, won't it? Because if we go back to Portimao next year, or even in 3 years or 2 years, whatever, we've got the knowledge that we had having run the race this weekend. So it's brilliant this year, some of these tracks turning up out of the blue, because it's given us some slightly unpredictable results or some slightly unpredictable effect over the race weekend. But that, of course, won't continue to happen. Hamza Ahmed says, Mark, is new regulation coming into effect from 2021? So there are some new regs coming in. We talked about them last time. There's changes to the technical regs around the floor. There's the cost cap coming in next year. There's also the aero research restriction coming in. But from the big change, where the cars change and a lot of the sporting regs change, is for 2022. Of course, it was originally destined for earlier, but it's been pushed back with the current climate. So 2022 is when Formula One 2.0 comes along. Could they do 19 consistent races each year with 2 or 3 varied races at different tracks? Well, you could do that, but for the same reason that I just explained, those 2 or 3 varied races at different tracks, who's going to pay for them? Who's going to invest, thinking that they've got a one-off hit in one particular year? They just can't afford to do it. So someone has to pay for all of these. If Formula One want to bankroll those things, that's fine. That's kind of what they're doing with the European venues this year to some extent, but it's not sustainable. Right, let's move it on then. How many wins would Lewis have with 25 races per year, Phil Crawford? Yeah, it's a good point. Liberty do have a desire to increase the number of races to 25 races is what their target number is. So, when we talk about the records and comparing records to people like Schumacher and others before them, of course, there are a lot more races today. And if you've got a dominant car like Lewis has, it is, of course, easier to start clocking those numbers up much more rapidly. But as I say, moving forward, you'll have more numbers of races perhaps, but there's a big desire to close up the field and level the playing field. So maybe less dominance would be the idea that F1 have. Right, shall we talk then? I've got loads of questions, but let's keep it in the chat for now because this is good. Let's see. Don't want another freeze just to suit Red Bull, says Jason Morgan. So let's talk about that, the engine freeze idea that Red Bull have. In fact, I think I've got a question on that, so let's bring it in. Who asked that one? Oh yeah, oh no, it wasn't that one. No, I haven't got a question on that one. So let's talk about. Have I got that one? No. Let's talk about that. The engine freeze idea that Red Bull have proposed. The idea being that they take on the Honda engines when they pull out at the end of 2021. They take all the hardware, they take all of the running software, the running kit off Honda, everything, all the infrastructure off Honda. Use some local, I think it's an Austrian company that they know, an engineering firm that is able to run the power units for them, dyno them, that kind of thing, and continue to operate them with some help from Sakura from Japan, but not Honda's full involvement. That's what Red Bull would love to be able to do because it means they don't have to go back cap in hand to Renault. That's really their only other option for an existing engine partner on the grid today. They would love to be able to remain independent by using the Honda stuff. But they can't really do that if the regulations, as is currently planned, allow development from year to year of that power unit, albeit restricted via tokens and things like that. But any development means they would then have to have a full-blown engine department that are putting a lot of research and development in. A huge amount of R&D goes into any upgrade that comes to a power unit. A huge amount of dyno testing behind the scenes. That's massively expensive and massively complicated and is not something that you can just do on the side if you're Red Bull. You need a big engine partner to be able to do that. Well, they haven't got one of those because Honda are leaving. If you froze the engine technology, which I think is planned anyway from 2023, but they want to bring that in early, if they did that, of course, you lose an awful lot of that cost, that R&D cost, because you've got your engine. Honda will have developed that engine up until the end of 21. You then just take that and you continue to run it. Now, running an engine is relatively simple. Yes, you'll need some spares and components, but Honda can supply all of that before they leave. What they can't do is continue to develop. And if you don't develop whilst development's allowed, you will very quickly disappear off backwards down the grid, which they don't want. So they've asked that Formula One bring the engine freeze, essentially bring it forward to help them out, to allow them to continue to run Honda power units. They want to keep the Honda name in, or the Honda technology in Formula One. They're selling this to Formula One as, we can keep 4 different power units on the grid. That's healthy for the sport. But the only way we can do it is if you freeze the engines early. Now, there are a number of ways to look at this, and sorry, I'll come to your comments in a moment. Mercedes have already sort of said, well, yeah, okay, Toto said, yeah, we could go with that. We could buy into that idea. Of course they could, because they've got the best power unit on the grid. So freezing that means they lock in their advantage. So absolutely see why Mercedes are down for that. With Renault, I suspect they wouldn't be overly comfortable, partly because it's helping out one of their bitter rivals in Red Bull. Secondly, because they still have some room for improvement on their power unit side. On the flip side of that, it would save them money, which would be attractive to Renault. But then it all comes back to Ferrari. If you're Ferrari, who currently have, let's face it, the worst power unit out of the 4, why on earth would you agree to locking in the hardware now or at the end of next year when, unless some miracle happens, you're not going to leap back up to the front in terms of your power unit performance capability? So there is no way I can see that Ferrari are going to want to agree to that. Why on earth would they? It makes no sense. And whilst you can say that, you may not need Ferrari to agree to that, if the majority of other stakeholders in the sport agree that that's the way forward, this is Ferrari. They can stop it if they want to, because they have that veto power. So if you haven't got Ferrari on board with this, they could dig their heels in and stop it from happening. And I can't see any reason why they wouldn't do that. So there we go. Let's see what you lot are up to, and what your thoughts on this are. Varun Sambi says the Renault power unit's not that bad right now. It's not that bad at all. I'm not saying it's that bad, but they've still got scope to improve it. They're still not the best power unit, I would say, out there. Renault may well be able to be swung around to the idea of freezing the technology because of the cost savings that they would then benefit from as well. Let me see. The engine freeze will help a few teams. Well, it will help a few Mercedes-powered teams. That's absolutely for sure, which is why they are so keen on the idea as well. Does it fall under Ferrari veto? It could do, yes. Adam Elliott, Ferrari would be able to veto that if they decided that they could put forward an argument that it wasn't the best thing for the sport. And I'm sure that is the argument they would put forward. Let's see. The red cars have a redesigned engine next year, so they might agree if it turns out to be a good jump in power. Well, this is the thing, right? So Ferrari, yes, they're bringing a new engine to next year. I can't see it being such a giant leap forward that they're suddenly going to catapult themselves back to Mercedes kind of levels. And if you're not at Mercedes power kind of levels, if you're not at the leading edge of power unit technology, why would you lock that in? Why would you freeze that in? You know, the only reason to freeze that technology voluntarily would be if you've got the best power unit, because otherwise you're locking in a disadvantage to those ahead of you. So Ferrari, if they suddenly have some magical transformation over the winter, maybe they will start to come round to that idea, but by then it might be a bit late. Red Bull need to make some big decisions about their future at the end of 21 pretty soon, probably very early into the new year. Merc domination makes me so very sad, says Warner Boomer. Well, I mean, I'm sorry that makes you feel sad. What should make you sad is actually the fact that the other teams, I don't know who you're a fan of, but the other teams or manufacturers haven't done a good enough job to catch up with Mercedes. There's no way that anybody should be blaming Mercedes for domination. I'm not saying that you are there, but Mercedes have just done an incredible job. It's coming from someone who worked in a team, you know, that's what every team is desperately trying to do. There's no way any team on the grid would not be very happy, absolutely wiping the floor with everybody, dominating, winning every race if you could. Getting a 1-2 in every race of the season is exactly what you try and achieve. The fans would hate it. Lots of fans would hate it. The sport would hate it. But as a team, that's all you've got your focus set on, is being the very best you can and obliterating the competition. So it's not Mercedes' fault, it's the fault of the others that haven't done a good enough job to keep up. Dylan Wheater, could they use the Honda USA instead of Honda Japan? Yeah, they could. I mean, they could use anybody could come into the sport if they want to. So if Honda USA, which is a different element of the Honda Motor Company, who actually they're the side of the organisation that run the IndyCar program. If they wanted to come in, they could, but I just can't see why anybody would want to invest in coming into a Formula One at this stage to run an old power unit which has no real opportunity left in it. So I can't see why they would want to do that. It cost a lot of money for very little return in that sense. There's been a Bottas freeze for years, George. It didn't take long, did it? George Alamo. Henry Coppard says, it's not Mercedes' fault, but 8 years of domination is bad for Formula One. Ratings have evaporated. Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. The casual fan will switch off. Absolutely. It becomes less of an interesting entertainment spectacle when you turn your telly on. And that's exactly why they're trying to level the playing field for the various rule changes that we're seeing coming in. So I totally buy that. It's just not Mercedes' fault, as you say. Right, let's move on. Let's get into some questions. Why, I can see Nick Philul says, why didn't Bottas get his soft tyres? And we have a question on that one from Andy Dowland on a similar note. He says, hi Mark, if you were Bottas's race engineer, would you have fought for him to change to softs? The correct choice was of course the hard tyre, but there was still a chance of a late safety car or rain, which could have given Bottas a chance of a win. Absolutely not. If I was Bottas's race engineer, Andy, I would have done exactly what Bottas's race engineer did and stick him on the hards. The soft tyres were just kind of suicide on Sunday, unfortunately, with the temperatures and with that particular circuit. They just didn't work. And whilst Bottas, yeah, you can see why he wanted to roll the dice and go the opposite way to Lewis, but the driver never has the full picture when they're sat in the cockpit. And I've been in the garage many, many times when a driver comes along thinking he knows what he wants. And sometimes they absolutely do, because they have a very, you know, special perspective on the feeling inside the car that we can't possibly have back in the garage. But what they never have is the full picture of all the data, both from your car but other cars, and what's happening around them on the racetrack, whereas the team do have that. And what the team could see were other people who had used the soft tyres, just saw they weren't working, saw that they were terrible. You know, they just could not deliver the longevity they needed, or even the performance they needed. So if they'd put Valtteri on that soft tyre, I mean, you may have got a late safety car, and possibly you'd have sort of fallen into a lucky situation. But the chances of that were so slim that actually the downside of that might be that he would have been in such trouble that he might have fallen back into the clutches of Max Verstappen. So absolutely the right decision to stick him on the hard tyre, and I would have done the same, Andy, if I was his race engineer. Perez crumbled on the soft, says Ash Cash 147. He did, absolutely. That was one of the real big indicators, wasn't it? Was seeing what happened to Perez, but also others too. Jamie Zach says, go Kimi. How about Kimi's first lap? Unbelievable. If you haven't seen that clip doing the rounds on YouTube, go check it out. His start and the first couple of laps were just a joy to watch. They were brilliant, weren't they? Absolutely fantastic. Yeah, softs lasted 6 to 8 laps. It was just not worth it. Absolutely no point in doing that. And whilst on the subject of tyres, Stefan78 says it seemed that many drivers had difficulties to warm up the tyres after pit stops. Was it all tarmac related, and did it mean that undercuts were no option? And yes, essentially that's a big part of it. It was tarmac related, and I'll explain that more in a moment, and also temperature related. It was cold, and the temperature actually varied quite a lot over the course of Sunday afternoon with the cloud cover that was coming in, and of course we had rain. You know, rain obviously lowers the temperature of the tarmac quite dramatically. With rain often comes very thick dark clouds which takes the sun away from it. You know, when you have new fresh tarmac, it's often very dark, black in colour. And what that does on a hot day is it warms up much quicker because the darker colours absorb a lot more of the heat from the sun. And that's you often get, when they've resurfaced half the track or a section of the track, that the new tarmac around one part of the track actually has a much greater surface temperature on a hot sunny day than other parts of the circuit because of the heat absorption. Well, we didn't really have that. It wasn't a hot sunny day, so we certainly didn't get that effect. And the other thing, apart from the actual temperature and the track surface temperature, which was low, the other thing was the fact that it was this new smooth tarmac. And when I say smooth, I don't mean that they lost a lot of the bumps around the circuit, which it definitely did do. I'm talking about on a macro level. If you zoom down in onto that tarmac under a magnifying glass, or just look at it very, very closely, just like if you go outside your house and look into the road, you see lots of little dents and imperfections, of course, in the tarmac. It's made up of an aggregate of stones and then a tarmac that glues it all together, essentially. Well, with brand new fresh tarmac, that tarmac that's gluing all the stones together is essentially filling in all of the little gaps in between those stones. And that's what brand new tarmac looks like. Gradually, as it gets used over time, and this is what you'll see generally if you walk out and look at on an old road or pavement outside your house, a lot of the little bits of that glue, that tarmac in between the stones, starts to wear away, starts to flick out as cars drive over it, and you get lots of little deep imperfections and holes in between the stones, or the stones start to protrude up above what was that layer of fresh tarmac. That means that on a real macro level, if you zoom in, it's much rougher over time, after it's been used over time, than it was this weekend. And it's that roughness, that macro roughness, which is one of the big things that helps to generate tyre temperature. Just simply through friction and getting the softness, the layer of the soft rubber of tyre when it's hot, sitting into all of those little gaps. It forms around those pieces of aggregate that are poking up on an old tarmac racetrack, and therefore it drags that tyre around. It moves the compound around as it's going around the circuit. That generates temperature. If you don't have that, and it's much smoother and there are no imperfections for the tyre to deform into, you just have less opportunity to generate that temperature within the compound. And that's exactly what happened this weekend. We had very little opportunity to work the tyres on that compound. So as you see a driver weaving back and forward, normally what you're doing is you're stretching that rubber backwards and forwards as it grips into those pockets, tiny pockets in the tarmac. We didn't have any of that. So as you start weaving around, all you do is you sort of slide. And when you slide over the surface, you raise the temperature of the surface of the tyre. Just simply through friction as it slides, the core of the tyre just does not warm up at the same temperature. And when you get this big differential between the surface temperature of a tyre and the bulk, the core of the tyre, when one gets much hotter than the other, that's when you get into the graining phase, and the top layer of the tyre just rolls away in little beads of rubber, just like when you drag a pencil eraser across a desk. That's graining. Those tiny little balls roll off the top of the surface. You obviously, once that happens, you slide on the balls of rubber, but you're also taking away chunks of rubber material, which means you start to wear the tyre as well. When you get less material left on the tyre, you get less opportunity to warm that compound up, because there's literally less mass as a thermal mass. So the whole thing is a spiraling disaster when you get into that kind of situation. So I hope that made some sense. I've waffled on quite a bit there, but that's essentially the big reasons why they struggled this weekend with tyre temperature, was the actual ambient and track temperature, but even greater than that, this brand new, fresh, billiard table smooth tarmac that is not what a Formula One tyre needs in the modern era. Let's see. Yeah, lifting drain covers is scary as fuck. Yeah, that wasn't good, was it? Absolutely, Nick. That was a real disaster. And we're very lucky it didn't cause even more of a disaster than it did with the delays. So yeah, that was bad. Let me see, what else have we got here? Is Lewis becoming even kinder on tyres? Remember, he used to not be, says Clanson. I think that's absolutely one of the things that Lewis has grown into. And when I talk about, even from my own experience of watching Lewis work and the way that he works and the way that he's always looking for tiny details to become better, tyre management is one of those things. Tyres is this black art, excuse the pun, in Formula One today, where engineers would love it to be an exact science, but it isn't. It almost is, but it isn't, because there are so many variables that are sometimes beyond your control to keep control of, to manage. And yet, if you can minimize those variables that are beyond your control and keep as many of the variables within your control, and mostly talking about tyre temperature, of course, well, then you've got a much better shot of keeping the tyre in the operating window. And that's one of the things Lewis has become very good at doing. Not taking too much out of the tyre at the wrong time and then leaving enough when he needs to use it later in the race. It's one of the things he's better, definitely better at Bottas than doing. Bottas seems to panic when he comes under pressure, and when you panic, you use up your tyre more. Not necessarily just because you're going faster, but because you become less controlled as a driver. You become less smooth because you're always twitchy, looking in the mirrors, you're always kind of worried about where he's going to go. Is he going to make a lunge for you? Lewis is very, very good at remaining in total control of how he uses his car and his tyres. So yeah, I agree. The early Marc overheated the rear tyres, says WAN 080876. That's another good point. So not just has Lewis got better at that whole tyre management thing, but Mercedes have put a huge amount of work into delivering a car that has this, again, minimises the variables that are beyond their control. DAS is a great part of that process, where they've developed a system that can start to help them with managing tyre temperature, but also lots of other areas about the chassis dynamics of the car, how the car uses its tyres. You're absolutely right. It was a killer on rear tyres. It was one of the car's weak points in years gone by, and yet today they seem to be very, very strong on that front. Varun Sambi says Lewis passed Bottas and still saved his tyre. Exactly, that's absolutely right. It is crazy. Tyres. Has any word escaped regarding the tyre test? No, tyres are always a talking point. Much as we often don't want them to be, They are probably the biggest single differentiator between cars and drivers on the grid. And, given that they've all got the same ones, they've all got the same opportunity, how they use them is the biggest thing that can swing performance, between one driver or one car to another. So there's an awful lot of work and science goes into them. All the big teams are poaching people from the tyre companies. In the days, back in the day, it was from Michelin and Bridgestone. Obviously now it's Pirelli. If you're a Pirelli tyre engineer, your value goes up through the roof because you have an insight not only into how the tyres work, but actually how tyres work on a number of other teams and what teams are doing to manage those tyres. So those are the people that perhaps have some of the biggest value in the sport right now. Can you give us your opinion on the track? Well, I think I did. I loved it. I loved everything about that track. As I say, I'd love to see it be a permanent feature. I thought it was an awesome, awesome track. Loved it. There you go. That's my opinion on the track. Let me see. Driver lineups. Yeah, let's have a look at that. I've got a question on driver lineups here. So and tell you what, let me just finish on tyres while we're on the subject of tyres. Quick one here from Jonathan Holmes, who says, seeing a rack of unused wets and inters, do the tyres go to the next race or another race further on, or do they get recycled with the used dry tyres? So that's a really good question. Of course, all the wet tyres which get mounted over a race weekend, and we thought we might get to use them in Portugal, but we didn't in the end. So what happens to them? Well, with the dry tyres, as soon as they're mounted onto a rim, essentially they have to, mostly they'll get scrapped, whether they're used or not. The main reason for that is that as soon as you've mounted a tyre onto a rim and then taking it off again at the end of an event, you put so much stress through the bead, you can't guarantee the integrity of that tyre moving forward. So that tyre, used or unused, gets scrapped. It gets recycled, so they don't just throw them away, but it gets essentially scrapped. At some races, so at European rounds, for example, if that compound is being used at the next race, they can keep them mounted onto the rims and they can transport them on the rims to the next race. They transport them in temperature controlled and humidity controlled trucks. So it's essentially a controlled environment, so they don't get too hot or cold in transportation because that can ruin them. But on a flyaway race, they can't do that. They can't control the temperature in the same way. So actually on a flyaway race, I think they pretty much scrap everything that was used or unused, because unless once it's come out of their temperature controlled containers, they're essentially done for. The wets though, Jonathan, will go on to the next race because there are fewer types of wet tyre, of course. There's only the full wet, the intermediate. We know those two compounds or those two types of tyre are going to be an option for every single race. So they can leave most of those mounted on rims at a European event and transport the rims and tyres still mounted between events. So those tyres that you saw in the garage in Portimao will rock up to Imola next weekend and be designated back to the same teams on their rims, essentially just put back into their garage. As I say, temperatures are all monitored in transport to make sure they don't go off or cure or get too cold, but they can be reused. So again, I think I've waffled a bit there, but hopefully that makes some sense. Right, I was going to talk about drivers. Oh no, I got one more. Got one more last tyre point. I promise you, one more tyre question from Jeff, who says, "What happens in a situation where you flat spot your fastest Q2 tyres in a Danny Rick Q2 type incident? Are you still obliged to start the race on those tyres?" And the short answer to that is yes. So a flat spot is not a good enough reason for you to change them. The rules say you have to start the race on those tyres. What you can do as a team, if you believe or if you can convince the FIA that you flat spotted a tyre so badly that it becomes a safety issue, and of course that's what all the teams will always try and do, you can then replace that tyre. You can't replace the set, you can only replace that tyre, which is normally a really unusual thing to do, and you have to replace that tyre with a tyre from your allocation which has the closest mileage to the one that you're taking off. So It's not like you can flat spot a tyre and then go and bung a new set on and say, well, we flat spotted that, so can we change them? You can't. You get to swap that particular tyre if they deem it to be an unsafe or a safety issue, but it has to be with the closest mileage tyre that you've got. That may be slightly more or it may be slightly less. So it's not a tactic that anyone would voluntarily use, but if you do have a big lockup and a flat spot, you can find a way around it if it's looking like a 50p. Right, no more tyre chat. That's it for tyres. Let's leave it there and let's move it on. We'll get to drivers in a moment. I'm just going down my list of questions. Feel free to jump in. In fact, let's get one from you lot. Let me see what you're saying then. Which race should be dropped to allow for Portimao to be a regular on the calendar, says 72 Defender. Well, I mean, look, on a really basic level, I would drop any of the much more modern, sterile Tilke tracks to put that one in. I'd dump Bahrain straight away in a heartbeat. I used to love going there, but the track is boring as hell. I'd swap it for that. But the fact that Liberty are looking to increase the number of races means you don't necessarily have to drop races. You know, they want to get more and more races in. And, you know, we don't know what's going to happen next year in terms of travel capability and the whole pandemic situation. But they're hoping to be able to go back to a much more kind of normal calendar. But they have got this desire to start increasing the number of races. So there's no real reason to get rid of one. John Norris says, Monaco, come on, you can't get rid of Monaco. I know that the race in Monaco is always a procession, but I don't care. I love Monaco. And what I love most about Monaco is that it's different to every other racetrack we go to, and it puts all the focus onto a Saturday, which makes qualifying the sort of star moment of the weekend. And qualifying around Monaco is spectacular. That brings out a whole new set of challenges for the teams and drivers, and they're brilliant challenges. And I get that this is a race, that's the main feature of the weekend, and I get that Monaco is almost always a dull processional race. And it does annoy me, I hate that part of it. But I don't want the same types of challenges at every race weekend we go to. So, everything that goes along with Monaco, for me, means it justifies a place. But I know that loads of you will disagree with that because you all want to see a great race on a Sunday. And I get that too. So, let's have this chat. Lots of you already jumping in. Paul Ricard, yeah, that could go, says Toka Racer. I absolutely agree with you on that. Jason Morgan says, keep Imola. Yeah, love Imola. I can't wait to go back there for next week. Drop Sochi. Yes, I would drop Sochi as well. Some of these races, not only do we get a boring race, I don't see that they offer very much else. When I talk about Monaco offering maybe not the best race, but it offers something else. It offers the glitz and the glamour. It offers the Saturday as the highlight of the weekend. What does Sochi offer us? And no disrespect to any Russians out there or anybody behind that race, because I've been to Sochi loads and loads of times and I can't find enough to be excited about keeping it on the calendar. But, of course, there is one thing, and it's that. Money is what makes this whole thing tick along, and if someone's got it and is willing to throw it towards Formula One, they have to consider that. Sochi must go. Sochi's terrible. Drop Brazil. Drop Brazil? Robert Chew? Drop Brazil? Are you serious? Come off it. Brazil's awesome. One of my favourite races is Brazil. I love that place. Drop China. Yeah, I suppose we could drop China. We'll have nothing left at this rate. Barcelona. I know Barcelona often produces a slightly dull race, doesn't it? But I actually quite like that place. 15 minutes to beer o'clock. Blimey. Thanks, Sandy Barnes. Blimey, that's flown by. Honestly, I've got 20 odd questions in my list tonight. I think we've done about 4 of them. Goodbye, Azerbaijan. I don't know. I think that's also got something a little bit different. It just offers a different engineering challenge with that mega long straight and a lot of the 90-degree corners. It may not be the most exciting track, but we can't have the same types of track every week. So we should have a variety of challenges, both for the drivers and for the engineers, in my opinion. And that's what I think we have. Bring back Kyle Army, says MJ Razor. Yeah, with you on that. Go to Laguna Seca. How good would that be? That would be awesome, wouldn't it? Finland deserves a track. Kind of does, doesn't it? I've always been surprised Finland has not come up with a solution to get itself on the Formula One calendar with its successful drivers over the years. Right, should we get through a couple more questions? Because there were a couple on, what have we got here? Oh, this one here from Chris Hunt. Can the Mercedes F1 engine start itself? A certain Sky F1 commentator says it can't, but other F1 engines can. So I know the answer to this, and I was talking to a mate of mine at Mercedes today, and I did double check it just in case it's changed. They can't. So the Mercedes cannot start itself, but other F1 engines can. Of course, they use the onboard, the MGUK to do that. In the old days, we never had that. We never carried a starter motor because of the weight penalty that would have to come with that. And we have an external starter that's jammed up inside the gearbox to turn things over and then fire up the engine. They still have that. They still use that in the garages in the most part, certainly in the mornings when they're firing them up from cold. But the Renault and the Ferrari and the Honda, I believe the Honda, all have the capability, if needed, to fire the engine up using the MGUK. The Mercedes doesn't, and one of the main reasons that they haven't chosen to go down that route is that they think that can put the MGUK under too much potential stress. It's a very fragile component, it's a very important component, and they feel like that should just be being used for its primary purpose. And if you use it to start the engine, which puts it under a huge amount of load, which they think is unnecessary load, you're introducing a potential risk to that component, which could let you down in a very serious manner if it fails. It's difficult to argue with that, but on the flip side, and of course the other thing is that it's very, very difficult to stall an F1 car these days because the anti-stall software is so good. So as soon as you go into a spin and it picks up this the various wheel speed numbers, directions and numbers, engine revs, it will kick in. The anti-stall software will kick in faster than a human can react, and it will stop the engine from stalling. So it's very unusual that you ever actually see an engine stalled, but there might be that odd occasion when it happens, and it's that occasion when Mercedes, if they're out on the racetrack somewhere, will not be able to restart their car, whereas others might. But they see that as such a rare occurrence that the risk against the reward is just not worth it. So that is the answer to that one, Chris. Let's see. Okay, let's come back to you guys, because we've got some questions on drivers, which I do want to talk about. Could Nico Hulkenberg go to AlphaTauri if they need him, as Red Bull might need constructors standing, says Mediacrafts. Well, he could go anywhere, of course, but I can't see that happening. But while we're on the subject of Hulkenberg, there were other questions about, here we go, Carl Slocum says, hi Mark, with Christian Horner basically saying that Albon is in the last chance saloon and then him nearly being lapped by Max, do you think Gasly and Albon will drive the AlphaTauris and they'll bring in Hulkenberg as a stopgap whilst those two mature further? So what Carl's suggesting there is maybe the young driver program at Red Bull isn't producing someone who's ready to take on that second seat alongside Max, but perhaps they could bring in somebody like a Hulkenberg to do that role. And the truth is they could do that. I definitely think that's a possibility. I think they've already said that if Albon doesn't up his game very quickly, then they will look outside of the Red Bull program. Essentially what that means is either Hulkenberg or Perez, and let's not forget Perez still comes with a certain amount of money behind him, which is valuable even to a Red Bull, or there's potential of a Magnussen, but I still don't think that Magnussen's attractive enough to that sort of team. So one of those old boys, one of those Perez or Hulkenberg, sorry, not old boys, experienced boys, I think is a really good option for them alongside Max. Dependable, experienced, much less likely to succumb to the pressure that a youngster is clearly succumbing to inside that program, where they're not fighting for their career. As I think I said this before, but Hulkenberg and Perez are two very good options. So then you've got to weigh up those two and you think, is one better than the other? I think Perez is on fire right now. I think Hulkenberg's done a great job. If they're very similar in terms of what they can bring into the car, the money, the backing that Perez brings might become an attractive option, even for a Red Bull. So I'm not sure. I just don't know which way that's going to go. I feel like they can't stick with Albon. It's great that they've given him this much loyalty and this much opportunity, but he's not delivering, and they need somebody to deliver. This is a business. They're not just doing this for fun. There's no sentimentality involved. They've got to deliver results if they want any hope of challenging for titles and the prize money that comes along with that. It's all big, important, critical stuff, mission critical stuff. And they need someone who can match, or at least come close to Max Verstappen. Albon and Bottas to get married. Russell to Red Bull. All right, Mr. Heli Chopper. So let's talk about George Russell. Have we got a question on that? I don't think so. Well, let's create one. What happens to George Russell? There is a lot of talk right now, of course, about his future at Williams being up in the air. It sounds to me like that's genuine. And again, for all the reasons that I said, Perez becomes very attractive. He is very attractive to a team like Williams because of the finance that he brings, but also, you know, they can build around a Perez over a 3 or 5 year period. They can't really do that with a George Russell because at the earliest opportunity, he's out of there. He wants his way into a Mercedes. Everybody knows that. Williams knows that. So it seems crazy to think that you would keep a Latifi over a George Russell given their results. And it is crazy. And this is one of the reasons, and the same goes with the Haas thing. Let's quickly roll that into this conversation. Haas getting rid of both of their drivers and then potentially filling those seats with people who bring money. It's very difficult to, or very easy to look at that and go, what on earth are they doing? You can't blame the teams for these situations. We've got to blame the situation that Formula One is in right now, in that teams, in order to survive, are being forced to go down this route. And I think it's an absolute shame. I know it's not a new situation. Teams have always had to look to drivers with money. Drivers with money have always been attractive. But in such an obvious showing of ditching a guy that's clearly better by a long margin than the guy in the other car, for someone who brings money along, is something that, for me, doesn't sit well. You know, at Racing Point, you know, this was another question. In fact, we have got a question on that one. Racing Point, Sean Fennon. Do you think Racing Point have made a huge mistake in dumping Perez instead of dropping Stroll? Surely Perez and Vettel together would have been a very strong pairing. Nepotism's never good, as a team must always come first. So Sean, I agree with you. That's nothing to do with recent results over the course of this weekend. I just thought Perez was a better option over the long term, and he brings money along with, you know, I mean, you could say that Stroll brings money. Stroll brings a lot of money. His dad's bought the team. But Perez brings money to that team, and I think he brings a bit more stability. Now, I don't want to criticise Lance Stroll too much because I think he has a lot of talent. I think he's a genuinely good Formula One driver. I'm not sure he's better than Perez, but maybe you could argue he's got longer term potential. But what Racing Point have ended up doing here is getting rid of the guy who's in form in Perez, the guy who's on top form, doing really well right now. They're switching him out for a guy who is in the worst form of his Formula One career, in Sebastian Vettel. And you can point to many reasons for that being the case with his Ferrari situation and everything else, but he's in the worst form of his career. Pairing him with a youngster who continually keeps making mistakes on a number of weekends. So does it look bright? Does the future look bright for Aston Martin with that driver lineup? Who knows? Only time will tell, but it feels like the driver market's gone crazy this year. So to finish off, let's talk. We've got 5 minutes. Let's see what you guys are saying. There we go. Let's leave Bottas out of this just for a moment, and let's talk about the Williams situation with Russell, the Haas situation, and of course the Racing Point situation, the pay driver situation, which is essentially what it seems to boil down to. Can Williams afford to buy Russell out of his contract, says Chris Adams? They certainly could if Sergio Perez came along. Yes, is the answer. Yes, of course they could. Russell won't be on, he's certainly not going to be one of the highest paid drivers on the grid. They've got new owners, of course, so the financial situation that Williams was in a year ago is not the same one today. They have some money behind them. Quite how much, we don't really know. But yes, they could do that. If they've got a long-term vision and they're trying to build something at Williams, then maybe it's a good decision to put someone in place who's there for the longer term. Maybe that's the justification for it. But yes, they could always buy any driver out of a contract if they want to. Kimi's swan song in a Red Bull. Yeah, he nearly drove for Red Bull a few years ago. Do you remember that? He had a lot of very serious contractual talks at Red Bull before he went back to Ferrari. Or was it, no, before he went to Renault, I think. So, yeah, that nearly happened, but I can't see it happening this time around. Let's see, what else we got? I see Max going to Mercedes in 2 years if Red Bull can't fix their engine issues, says Zitro Garage. Garage. Look, Max would love a Mercedes seat, and I'm sure that Mercedes would love a Max Verstappen at some point down the line, perhaps. But in 2 years' time, let's say Lewis Hamilton decides to walk away at the end of 2 years, they either have groomed George Russell by that point to fulfill the promise that we think he might be able to show, or they look outside and bring in somebody like a Max. Either option, or even both options, could definitely work. So there's nothing to say Max couldn't ever end up in a Mercedes. I don't know if he's quite the right fit for Mercedes, the Mercedes board. It could be quite disruptive, but in terms of his talent and his driving ability, I'm not sure who you'd want more than Max Verstappen. If Williams drop George, could Marc pull their engines and supply Red Bull? Absolutely not. There is no way that would happen. Firstly, Mercedes don't want to supply Red Bull because I think they would very quickly become a threat. And it's not really a problem for Mercedes. It's not really an issue that Mercedes need to get involved in if Williams decide to drop George Russell. If Williams drop George Russell, he'll be swallowed back up, a little bit like Ocon was in the Mercedes family, simulator driving, testing whenever he can, with a view to dropping him into that Merc seat. He's a perfect fit for the Merc seat as soon as it becomes available. I suspect if this had happened 6 months ago, he would have probably been dropped into that Merc seat for 2021 alongside Lewis to learn the ropes, alongside the great, grooming him ready for when he's ready to take over the reins from Lewis when he finally jacks it in. So I don't think it'll be the end of the world for George Russell, but it's definitely not what any driver wants, of course. Gasly to Renault, says Redmond Barry. That is a possibility, absolutely. Pierre Gasly is driving his socks off right now, doing all he can. There's nothing more, really, that he can do inside the car to prove his worth. If Red Bull decide that he's not the right man to move up, I don't know what the contract situation is with Gasly and Red Bull, but he needs to look outside of it. We've seen Carlos Sainz do it, and that worked out for him. There is nothing to stop, or no reason why that wouldn't work out for Pierre Gasly. There is a lot of opportunity inside Red Bull, but it feels like Gasly has maxed out that opportunity. He's done his best, it hasn't worked out, so maybe it's time to move outside, and maybe Renault's a good place for that. French driver in a French team as they become Alpine. Sounds good, doesn't it? Right, we're about there, aren't we? 58, yeah, that's it, guys. Anything else you want to say? Gasly is my driver of the season for sure, says Michael Holgate. Yeah, look, Gasly has been on fire. I love the guy. I think he's been brilliant. His attitude's great. His performances have been great. So he is definitely a driver of the season so far. But it's difficult to look past Lewis Hamilton, isn't it? So let's close it on that note. Again, talking about Lewis Hamilton, 92 wins, the greatest driver statistically of all time. And I can promise you, as I think I said to you last time, a week or so ago, when I was there for his very first win in Montreal, we knew he was special. We could see the special talents, the special parts of his personality. I promise you, we knew that. We see that. Nobody, not even Lewis, nobody thought he would be this special and go on to achieve, you know, these kind of things. So I take my hat off to him. He is an incredible driver. I have nothing but respect for what he's able to do inside the car. And I think it's going to be amazing to watch how far that goes as these records continue to tumble. Can't wait to see what happens this weekend in Imola. That, by the way, is also a great circuit. Very difficult to overtake, but a great circuit nonetheless. A lot of history. Old school gravel traps as well. Changed a bit since we last went there too, so keep an eye out for that. I'll be doing a circuit guide later this week. Check that one out. And I'll see you all very soon. Have a great week, folks. Ta-da!